In this lesson, we will learn how to create gradient backgrounds. In graphic design, we typically think of a gradient as a gradual or smooth transition between two colors. So let's hop over to an example and give ourselves a goal. Here is an example page, and let's imagine that we want the sidebar, which is currently light green, to instead use a gradient background. And let's pretend that we want the top of the sidebar to start out as this light green color, and we want it to transition vertically so that the bottom of the sidebar uses a white background color. So we've identified our goal. Now let's hop over to the text editor. We are viewing the CSS file. Here is the rule for the sidebar. We can see that it's currently receiving a solid background color. Now instead of a solid color, we want to use a gradient. So I'm going to delete this line, but first I'm going to copy this hexadecimal color code to my clipboard so I can paste it in just a moment. So with that line out of the way, let's write the code to create a gradient. As far as the web browser is concerned, gradients are background images. So we use the background image property. Only, unlike last lesson where we pointed towards graphic files, to create a gradient, we just need a bit of code. So modern web browsers can leverage the linear gradient function, and we can pass it several values. So first we specify which direction we want the gradient to flow. So I will say to the bottom, comma. We then specify what color we want to begin with. So I will paste in the hexadecimal color code for that green value, comma. And then we specify what color we want to fade to. So I'll input white. So if I save and refresh in the browser, now because we didn't have to create an actual graphic image file to create this gradient effect, it means we can change the appearance of this gradient with just a few characters. So if we wanted the colors to flow from the left to the right instead of from the top to the bottom, we could say to the right, to right. Or if we wanted the gradient to flow from the top left to the bottom right, we could say to bottom right. And we then have a diagonal gradient. But I'm going to switch this back to simply to bottom because I think that looks best. Now this lesson would be complete if the entire world used the most updated web browsers available. But that's not the world we live in. So if someone visits our website and they're using an outdated web browser that does not support CSS gradients, at the very least we want the sidebar to have a solid green background. So in our code, directly above our gradient line, we can provide fallback code for older browsers. Background color, and we'll paste in that standard green color. So at the very least, even if someone comes to our page using a very old browser, they will see this. But we can leave this line of code in as well, so if they're using a new browser, they will see this. Now we could stop here, but let's go the extra mile. So if someone's using a brand new web browser, this code will work just fine. If they're using an incredibly outdated browser, this will be the fallback. What if someone uses a web browser that's just a tiny bit outdated? Well, that's where things get messy, and that's where you no longer need to worry about remembering this syntax. And we as developers resort to a desperate spaghetti tangle of code that I'm going to paste in so I don't bore both of us to death by typing it in. So again, do not worry about memorizing any of the highlighted lines, but I will review them very quickly. So this is the very outdated WebKit way of creating gradients. This is the slightly outdated WebKit way of creating gradients. This is the outdated Mozilla way. This is the outdated Microsoft way. This is the outdated Opera way. And obviously this last line is the line that we created together. So this is the modern, non-browser specific, correct way to create a gradient. Now again, don't worry about memorizing these lines. This is something that you can copy and paste and modify for your own projects. But with all of this code in place, we now have a gradient effect that will work in almost every browser and device under the sun. And worst case scenario, even if someone's browser doesn't support gradients, they will at the very least see the solid green background color that we provided as a fallback. That's going to bring this lesson to a close. I encourage you to experiment with gradient backgrounds in your own designs. Have fun, and I will see you in the next lesson.